What did your neighbours think of this project?
Probably thought I was crackers, really.
This is Cold War Conversations.
If attack is imminent, you will hear the attack sound like this. If the fallout warning sounds are heard, they will be like these. Buy food well wrapped or in tins. By the way, don't forget your tin opener and bottle opener.
If you're new here, you've come to the right place for unique first-hand accounts of the Cold War. Do make sure you follow us in your podcast app so you don't miss out on future episodes. Graham Bate was a 30-year-old civil servant when he built his own nuclear bunker in the garden of his rural home 20 miles outside Hull in the UK. It was here that the Bate family expected to survive for at least 3 weeks after a nuclear attack. We speak with Graham Bate and his son Conrad, who was 5 years old when the bunker was built and has vivid memories of the period. Now, Cold War history is disappearing. However, a simple monthly donation will help preserve these accounts and keep this podcast on the air. You'll get the sought-after Cold War Conversations drinks coaster as a thank you, and you'll bask in the warm glow of knowing that you're helping to preserve Cold War history.
I'm Tim from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I support the Cold War Conversations podcast financially because of the great research and the quality of the storytelling.
Just go to coldwarconversations.com/donate. If a financial contribution is not your cup of tea, then you can still help us by leaving written reviews wherever you listen to us and sharing us with your friends. It really helps us. Now, I'm delighted to welcome Graham and Conrad to our Cold War conversation.
It was early 80s, so we're looking at probably nearly 10 years before the Berlin Wall came down, and there was quite a lot of tension in the world. There was a lot of hype about protection from nuclear attack in the media, mainly in newspapers. And a lot of talk about how the Queen had access to it and the top of the MPs in the House of Parliament had, but the grunts like us weren't looked after. We were just cannon fodder if something happened, apart from daft things about sitting under the stairs if there was a blast and stuff like that. I'm not saying it would be a completely waste of time doing that, but it's a bit pathetic, really, when it's trying to protect yourself from nuclear weapons. It's a bit like trying to put a paper bag up against a bullet. Similar sort of effect, really. So there was a lot of talk around, and I got interested in trying to do something myself. I looked around to see what other people were doing. There was a lot of amateur attempts building under garages and stuff like that, really Heath Robinson type stuff. But I got in contact with a guy called Tom Butler from Nuclear Protection. I'm not sure if he's still around, actually, but and I spoke to him about trying to build my own bunker, and he gave me a blueprint of a standard bunker design, which was up to Swiss standards, which was the best standard at the time, because the Swiss at the time had been building nuclear shelters for all their population, and they were pretty much done and dusted in the early 80s. They were fully protected if there was a nuclear war for all the population, not just the elite. And I thought it was a good idea, and I sort of got involved in it, costed it out. We had a big back garden. We had about 4 acres at the back, and the garden was over an acre, so we had plenty of room. And I'm a structural engineer by profession, so I knew how to go about getting a contractors in to do it, to do the excavation work, to build the hill afterwards, because we had to build it a bit out the ground because of the fact we're in a flood area. So if there was a nuclear blast, the flood protection could be breached. So I had to design for that as well. So I didn't want to drown even if we'd survived. a nuclear blast. And so I went ahead with it. It cost a lot of money in today's terms. It would probably be something like about 70 or 80,000, maybe even a bit more. In those days, I think it was thick end of 20,000. So it was a lot of money, but it was all to Swiss standard. So it was all Swiss gear, Swiss ventilation, manual ventilation. There was filters for biochemical attack as well as nuclear. But I'd done all the research, and I'd done all the studies. I knew all about Hiroshima and Nagasaki and about the survival, people who survived. So I was fully confident and got on with it.
So Nuclear Protection was a company that built bunkers, was it, in the UK?
No, they didn't really build bunkers. No, they just supplied the gear to build them. They supplied the shells for the blast-proof doors and the casings, because they were made of 200 mil thick reinforced concrete, the doors. They weren't like little bits of tin that the MOD was using at the time. This was proper gear. And they provide all the ventilation equipment, and they provide the design as well, so that you could have a standard pod you could build. The hatch covers and things like that, ventilation pipes, the ladder inside, all that type of thing they'd supply.
And can you describe the bunker? It sounds like it was partially underground with an earth mound over the top.
That's right. Yes, it was built. Just trying to think of the size of it. Something like the main chamber was something like probably about 15 foot long, maybe slightly shorter, probably about 6-7 foot wide. A bit like the inside of a caravan, really. Imagine with not much in it.
Graham's 5-year-old son, Conrad, was slightly less impressed by the design.
Because I remember thinking, don't they have to be underground? I mean, it is underground, but it's a hill. So it's maybe half out, half in. And I remember, I was 5, but I remember thinking it wasn't as good as it should be, like a kid sort of does. So I never said it. But I thought, you say it's a bombshell, but it's sticking out of the ground, that kind of thing. That's the sort of 5-year-old mindset.
Here's Graham again, continuing his description.
And then there was a chamber where you came down, an entry chamber which was separate from the main chamber, where you basically decontaminated if you came down the ladder. So you had a place to decontaminate yourself. That was also shielded. It wasn't shielded to a lesser standard.
Here's Conrad describing his first time he entered the bunker.
I remember the first time I went in it, I was really nervous. There's a thing on the way down the steps. The metal steps are quite steep. Well, they're steep steps. They're like ladder, but very long stepped ladder. So you've got a big place to put your foot. And there's this little red thing. I still don't know what it is. It sort of tips with the wind. I think it's some sort of pressure gauge, and it's about the size of a clock face, small clock face, and it bounces around. And I think it's some sort of pressure gauge. And I don't know why this got my attention, but I didn't like it. This thing tapping around as I was going down the steps. And I didn't like the fact that I couldn't lift the door up, but I could just about get it to move. But there was a peg, like quite a good metal peg that goes in it to stop it from falling on you. And I didn't trust this peg, So I remember things like that, like not wanting to go down unless somebody was holding the door. And I think my dad was always below me anyway.
Back to Graham describing the interior.
The main chamber was accessible through 2 doors. So you had a first door and a second door. And then there was an emergency escape hatch if the main chamber became blocked. And there was an emergency escape hatch as well with an extra door and an extra front cover.
Young Conrad was really impressed by the weight of the main chamber's door.
I remember the dad showed me the door inside and told me it weighed a ton. And I remember not really knowing what a ton was, but thinking it was an enormous amount of weight, like nothing human is a ton, that kind of thing. And I could sort of move it, not much. I could kind of really push it. I could kind of get it to move an inch to a millimetre or two. And this door does weigh a ton. It's on 2 or 3 big hinges, and it moves very slowly. And you have to really get it moving with your weight, but it will slowly start to creep open. It's thick. It's a giant lump of concrete. It's very well balanced for what it is.
Graham goes on to describe the water supply and the sanitation.
It had tanks in there for water, and there was a toilet with a chemical toilet. So it had a chemical toilet in there. There wasn't a shower facilities, but there was food. So plenty of water. There was the ventilation system, and there was bunks in there, and with sort of bedding, etc., like that.
Conrad vividly remembers the smell.
I remember going down and how cold it was. The difference in temperature is quite obvious, and it's got a smell. Smell is pretty unique, actually, to bomb shelters, if I'm honest. It smells sort of like concrete and grease and oil, and it's a smell that you immediately recognise when you're in the bomb shelter with your eyes closed. It has a cold dampness to it. It's kind of hard to explain. The atmosphere, it's not unpleasant, but it's just different.
Do check out the photos in the episode notes that show the interior and outside of the bunker. I asked Graham about local planning permission.
I'm not sure. I didn't apply for it.
Bit late now.
Well, no. Now they'd be more twitchy, but in those days things were fairly relaxed. I don't think at the time you did. I think I did look into it, and I think it was because it was a private shelter. It didn't need it, although it was some grey area. So I didn't bother to inquire. I just got on with it. I never had any issues with planning, and of course it's been there for over 10 years now, so it's got full planning by default. So they can't tell you to take it out now.
Yeah, and what did your family think about this project?
And I think my wife was a bit sceptical about it. Our kids, well, they just sort of do what the parents do, really. I mean, they were just thinking of the age, and then they were quite young, really. 81, so where are we, 20 years, 40 years ago, isn't it? So young kids, really. They thought it was great climbing down the ladder and stuff like that. And we did stay in it for one of the TV companies. We stayed in there for a week. So we did have a trial run down there, see what it was like.
Here's Conrad describing his experience of the trial run.
So we lived down there for a week for the TV crew, and we did live down there. We didn't get out, nothing. And we had this hand pump shower. It was a yellow thing. We had a sort of suction pump, and it didn't really shower. It came out like a glug. It worked. I didn't really like using it, but it worked. We didn't cheat, so we did everything down there. We lived for a week. I lived in a triple bunk, which I thought was awesome. It was just 3 bits of wood with chain hanging off the wall and a hinge. But I've got a feeling I was on the bottom. I think my brother was above me, and I'm not sure. I think my mum and my dad was above that, and then my sister must be on the floor somewhere. It's not very big in there, but it felt like about the size of a caravan, so it wasn't intolerable. I remember really enjoying it. When you're little, being around mum and dad a lot is always good. Like you just think, I've got my dad whenever I want him. He's just there, It probably pushed my mum and dad quite hard, but I didn't remember it like that. I remember it being like an adventure, and it felt like it lasted less than a week to me. That sounds weird, but it did. I'm not even sure what the routine was. I just remember being in there and doing lots of repetitive tasks, like the spinning the air filter. I think we probably played board games and stuff, but I don't really remember that. Drawing, I guess, doing some reading, I guess. I don't remember doing that, but I'm assuming that's what we did. It's like when you go in a car, you go on a long journey in a car, you get the car is a bind. You're like measuring the miles, and it's like 20 miles to go. Wow, that's really good. And you finally get out of the car and you think, crap, it's 2 hours and I don't remember really what happened. But when you're in the car, it's a grief. But as soon as you're out, it's like it's time warp. And it's a bit like that in the sense you go in there, while you're there, it drags all the time. And then when you're out, it's like a compressed amount of time in your memory. And then we did the TV people again, and the Australians were lovely, and they asked us nice questions. They talked to us, even though we were kids. I remember they were talking to us properly. the people from I'm going to say Granada, but I don't know who they were. They were Where There's Life. They were a bit snotty and snooty, and they just seemed a bit. I just remember this, not thinking they cared at all. And then we went back to what we were doing, and I remember we watched it. I can't remember actually what it was that we was on, but it was really short. We watched Where There's Life. We stayed up to watch it. It was some weeks, months, must have been later. It was on a Thursday, I think, and we were watching it, and it was like gone in like 4 minutes. And it was like, well, what a waste of time. We've been in a bunker. And my mum, years later, I think we were in Germany, which would have put me at about 11, because we went to Germany quite a number of years on the trot, but around when I was 11 and 12. And my mum came back from somewhere, and she said that someone had stopped her who was Australian and said that she recognised her from the TV, and that the TV show in Australia was much longer. So they made like a full thing of it. So I think we were more. We're not. I would not. That the word celebrity would not even come close to dignifying it. But like we had some. They'd obviously made an effort to put a show together. But I guess it's got that flavour, isn't it? It's the other side of the world for them, and things like that. So we would probably feel the same if we had a bit of footage of Australians living in the outback, in a bunker. We'd probably think that was cool, So probably that was why. But it was. I remember that being cool, and that was years later. And and I think one was queuing for ice cream or something, and she said this woman had spoken to her.
Graham had a slightly different view of the experience.
A bit boring, really. I think the main problem was making sure the air was properly circulated, because you couldn't operate the pump all the time, because obviously you had to go to sleep. So you didn't need to operate it very long to completely change all the air in the chamber.
One of Conrad's favourite jobs was helping with the ventilation of the bunker.
So there's an air extractor system, and it's quite sensitive to how fast you turn the handle to pump air. It's basically a manual pump. It's a bit like the old starter motors of 1910, 1920s motor car, but in the wall. And it's got a little glass window on it with a red and black pressure tick. It's a mechanical thing, and the piece inside flicks from black to red if you're doing it too fast. There's a certain amount of pressure it likes to work under, and you have to spin it quite slowly. And I used to think that was like a bit rubbish, and I'd be like trying to spin it as fast as I could. I was a little kid, and I was trying to go for it. And I'd always have it tick onto the red, and I'd always get told off for it. And we used to do that quite often. So we'd twist this spinner, and it's quite heavy to get it going. I used to like doing that. I thought it was fun. But I was always being told off for doing it too fast. And I thought I was doing it slowly, but I was doing it too fast.
Here, Graham describes what happened when the oxygen levels got too low in the bunker.
But what I did find out is that the human body is quite cleverly designed, and that when your CO2 level in an area where you are sleeping goes up to too high a level, you wake up. It's an automatic preservation thing. I didn't know that humans had that built into them, but they do have, as I found out. So I used to go to sleep, and about 3 or 4 hours it'd be stuffy. Woke up, put the air pump on, and didn't bother anyone else.
Right. What did your neighbours think of this project?
Probably thought I was crackers, really. But I think there was a lot of talk at the time. It wasn't just me talking about it. There was a lot of talk. I mean, there was the where I am now, East Riding, was called Humberside in those days. And the Humberside County Council had an emergency planning department, and they trained volunteers what to do in event of a nuclear attack. And that's I used to be a member of that Humberside County Council team as a volunteer, and I used to go to their conferences and attend their training. So there was a lot more people involved than perhaps you would now think.
Yeah. No, I do remember that period of the early 80s where obviously there were the big C&D demonstrations as well. Cruise missiles were being deployed, and it seemed like the tensions had ratcheted up somewhat during that period. Did you practice getting in there sort of like within 4 minutes or anything like that?
Well, no, that was a bit of hogwash, really. That's just media hype. I mean, basically, if there was a nuclear war declared, I would have got the family in there straight away. I did make sure there was enough food in there for a number of weeks, so that we had contingency plans. I didn't want the situation to be where we were trying to rush. It's not like getting ready for a holiday or anything. You've got to have it ready to go, really, at all times. So basically it meant everyone just trooping in and in you go. I don't think we'd have got a 4-minute warning where we were. I'm not aware there was any sirens anywhere near us. You'd probably just seen a flash and just hope that it was a long way away, because we're in the country and we probably would have been, unless there was a bad aiming, we weren't near any big town. So I'm no doubt we'd have had the effects of the nuclear fallout, but the actual blast and initial flash was probably quite low likelihood of us being hurt by that. Although the house we were in probably would have had the windows smashed and stuff like that. That would have probably stayed intact unless to say it was a fairly near strike.
So I guess you were assuming there would be some build up of international tension, and then you would be at home and ready to go. Yeah,
because, the media would then sort of report the Prime Minister's gone in his bunker. I thought, well, if the Prime Minister's going in there, I'll go as well. That's the way I looked at it.
And how long did you think you were going to have to stay in there if the worst happened?
Well, I had a radiation meter, external probe, and I had an inside one as well, so I could test the radioactivity levels. But I think with the half-life of most nuclear explosions, if you can stay in there 14 days, the radiation level after about 14 days should have dropped sufficiently to go out for short periods. And then as time went on, the radiation would drop off and go lower and lower until it became virtually negligible.
What sort of food did you have in there? Presumably it was mainly tinned.
Yeah, it was just tin, really. We didn't have anything. Tin was the most simple thing, and as long as you had a tin opener, we had a means of heating as well. We had a little, like you would camping, like camp. I think we had a paraffin heater, so that something a bit easier than gas. So we had a fairly crude heating device, but that worked. Yeah.
Conrad wasn't a big fan of the food in the bunker.
I remember we went to a shop called Nissa, which is gone now, and it was a reasonably big brand then. It had this black and white paper, very, very sort of weirdly World War II looking ration pack type of product, and everything they had was white with this really, really weird font. It's the sort of font that the A-Team's written in, with the A-Team logo, with the A, and they deliberately played on this. It was black and white labels. And I'm sure it was Nissa, this company, but it was their budget brand. And everything we had to eat was Nissa. And it was like tins of beans from Nissa, milk powder from Nissa. And I bloody hated Nissa. I just remember this stuff, just thinking it was horrible. And everything, porridge, everything came in this, whatever it was, cereal, it was a white box or a white tin or a white packet. And it was this black stencil writing and then some ingredients on the back. It was really basic. And I don't know what happened to that brand or that store, but I just remember this Nissa. I didn't know. I think it was Nissa at the time. I looked it up for some reason, like 10 years ago. So I was trying to describe it to my mate. Remember that stuff that was horrible? And no one else could remember it. And when I found a picture on Google Images, and I was like, that's it. And it was Nissa. It was made by Nissa as their massively budget Tesco version of Tesco value.
Because you'd think if you were going to be stuck in a bunker, you'd have, you take down some decent food with you rather than a budget brand.
Oh no, my dad's not made that way. It's just calories,
I asked Graham how the lighting in the bunker was powered.
Yeah, we had a battery. We had two systems. We had the normal peacetime battery lighting, which was just fluorescent lights in those days, no LEDs. But we had a secondary 12-volt battery backup. We had a couple of big, deep capacity discharge batteries that should have lasted the time. We didn't really have any system to charge them back up again. There was no solar panels in those days, or if there were, they were fairly crude. So we couldn't have, nowadays you could just plop a little solar panel outside, and once the blast had stopped so it didn't get damaged, and it would happily, charge your batteries up in the day and discharge at night.
You had estimated that the batteries would last the 14 days.
Yeah, because you wouldn't have them all the time. We had torches as well. We had about 6 torches, so they were emergency torches. So we had it all. Then they were all sort of parked on the wall in strategic places. So it was well thought out. Really. How
would you know it was safe to come out of the bunker? Would have been based on the radiation levels you were detecting outside?
Yeah, I mean we'd have had a radio as well to see if we could pick up anything, from outside broadcasts, which might give us a bit of confidence. But I mean, I would have just stuck my head out really. If the radiation levels had dropped outside to a sensible level, I would have stuck my head out and had a look.
Conrad talks about his view of staying in the bunker once a nuclear attack had started.
You would, if it was a nuclear attack, it would be more than a week. But I don't think it was many weeks. And I think he talked about how he would go out alone, come back, and there'd be a shower. He'd have to have a shower, and he'd go out alone and come back. And he talked about how he would slowly come out, and he would say, we'd go out for an hour and come back in, and stay in and what, do you know what I mean? So it wasn't like you don't just leave, you leave and come back, leave and come back, and slowly stretch the time out, that kind of thing. And he was going to go first for, I suspect, for at least a week. So whatever happened when it felt better, what better would look like, I don't know. He would be the one going in and out. All parents love their kids, but my dad has got an excess of that. He's really interested in his kids' safety, if that makes sense. All parents are interested in their kids' safety, but my dad he's an extreme variant. He's very cautious and stuff like that. So, and he's very, even now, he'll come to my house and he'll insist on going up the ladder and doing the gutters at my house. And he won't let me go up the ladder. And he's an old guy, and I'm like, Dad. And he's like, no, because if I fall down, I've had my life. That's what he says. And he still does stuff for me that he thinks is dangerous.
I asked Graham what the post-nuclear world would look like.
Well, there'd be a lot of people, a lot of hungry people around. I think it would, law and order would disintegrate initially. There wouldn't have been, the police force probably would have been, if they had been around, they'd probably been decimated and killed like a lot of the population. The army probably would be a bit more organised than the police, a bit more protected. So, but again, we're in a country, the likelihood is there wouldn't be an awful lot of people around, I suspect. But those that were around would probably want to try thieving your food and getting what you had. So you'd have to be ready to protect yourself.
And were you? Did you have weapons?
No, I wasn't into weapons. No, I didn't. I wasn't into guns or knives or anything like that. I just, I did have my tools in the shed. We had a small holding, so it was a small farm in a way. So I had axes and stuff like that, and pitchforks and things for hay. So I suppose if the worst come to the worst, we could have used those.
Were you fearful of people trying to get into the bunker whilst you were sheltering in there? Oh
yeah. It was proof against that. You couldn't get in from the outside unless you used mechanical cutting tools. You wouldn't be able to get in by. If you were in there, it was properly locked, so they couldn't. They had proper push buttons on all the latches and stuff. You wouldn't have been able to get in.
One of the local villagers tells Conrad what he would do if there was a nuclear attack.
There was a guy in the village, and I was a kid, and he went up to me and he said, "Oh, we've got a nuclear bomb shelter," because you just or people asked you and thought you were a bit weird, and I'd say, yeah, we do, and this guy just said, I think he was a bit drunk and joking, and he just said, I don't need a nuclear bomb shelter. I've got a shotgun. All I need to know is where one is. I hated that guy. I proper hated him. I didn't want to go near him. I thought he was some weirdo. And I just thought that's a horrible way to look at it. And I suspect that's not actually far off quite a lot of people's mindset. You know, if there was some siren going off, they'd come barreling down and you wouldn't, do you know what I mean? You might not get away with it, you know.
Here's Graham telling me how they kept themselves entertained.
Yeah, I think we had books, so we had some a lot of pencils and paper. I think we had a primitive game device. I seem to remember one of the early daft games that used to be around in those days. I don't think we had any jigsaws down there, but I think we just tried to keep the kids entertained. That was the main problem, just keeping them entertained, really.
Conrad tells us of his view of that 1 week stay in the bunker.
I think we'd been in there probably maybe half a dozen times, just in and out, you know, doing stuff. But when we actually went to stay in for a week, I don't remember having as much stuff in before. You know what I mean? It was packed for the, you know, not packed with food, but just it was for there was things, you know, we would plan to live in there. Does that make sense? It's like a caravan holiday as opposed to a caravan in storage. You know, they're just different. So I can't remember too much about the way it was before. We certainly never used the shower before. I think I'd washed my hands in the sink once. And this time we were using the sink, the hand pump sink, but we were using it, you know, every time we needed to wash our hands, you know what I mean? We weren't using the water wastefully, but there was enough. You know what I mean? My dad was aware of it, and we were allowed to use the sink and wash up. And I just remember the pump slurping, you know, like a hand pump. And it was like a pipe that came out of the wall. It was really naff, really. And you just sort of pulled the handle. This thing it was like a bit like a beer pump, but not as cool. And it was just this flange thing, like a black rubber hand pump on a yellow sort of lever and metal pipe. And you just pulled it, and it literally sort of squirted out water like in gulps as you pulled it. But it worked.
So what was the sort of sanitary facilities like?
Ooh, I think we had Portaloo, like a chemical. Yeah, I think we did. Good question, actually. I think we had a green one. You take it as I'm pretty sure there was a green Portaloo with a white concertina plunger in the corner, and you had to push it. And I think my thumb didn't like it. You know, when I just didn't have the power in my fist. And I remember having to really push it, and I didn't like this thing. I think it lasted the week.
Yeah. And did you have books and things down there? I mean, you mentioned you think you had board games, but...
We must have done, but I don't remember any of that. We had no telly, no radio. No, nothing. And it was just, we must have had colouring books and pen, paper, and been read to and done. We must have had our days broken up. I remember the tasks being quite a big part of it. The turning the fan, like a thing that I used to have a turn of, like my brother would do it for a bit, and we wouldn't do it for a bit, and then my dad would do it for a bit, and it'd be my turn. I remember really liking doing it. I don't know why.
Well, I guess it's something to do at the end of the day, isn't it? So, and something you feel as though you're doing something important as well as a young kid.
Yeah, I think you probably hit it on the head there, yeah. I just remember being really eager to do it and always doing it too fast for this little thing that ticked back and forth. My dad going, "Oh, you're doing it too fast," you know.
Yeah, I was just thinking, if you're down there for that, you know, like 7 days, was there any, and you may not remember this, but any way of distinguishing between what was daytime and what was nighttime?
No, other than the lights going on and off. we did keep to obviously the real. I think to some degree. I think it was summer when we did it, so we probably turned the lights off a little bit earlier than natural daylight. My dad probably kept the hours that kids needed. Yeah, no, I don't remember it being. I remember having powdered milk cereal. I bloody hated it. Oh yeah, like mixing the powdered milk was just like, oh please no more. We had a lot of pasta. I think we had a lot of dry stuff that needed water and tins. It was like that. I think there was a stove of sorts. There must have been.
I asked Graham if he's ever seen the film Threads, which depicted a nuclear attack on the city of Sheffield in the UK.
Yeah, probably. Probably don't know it by that name. Don't quite know why I wouldn't know it by that name. But I think was it the one where the people went under the stairs and stuff? Or I did attend a programme. I'm not sure it was BBC or ITV, and I was a member of the audience, and I was asked a question. I think it was called The Day After or something. The Day After. It rings a bell. I don't think that was a film. I think it was an earlier one. Was it an education film or was it?
No, it was a drama. It was a BBC or ITV drama.
A drama, no. Yeah, I probably wouldn't have watched it because I've probably been very cynical about them. I'm a bit cynical about that type of big boy media. I did find then, and certainly now, the knowledge of the media at the time about nuclear was extremely poor. Really, the education of the average person on the TV was very low, so they didn't understand what they were talking about most of the time, which probably hasn't greatly changed, I suspect. But it was something I probably wouldn't have got terribly interested in, really, because I knew how to do things, and I didn't need any drama program to watch it. I'd actually done something. I hadn't talked about it. I'd done it.
It sounds like, the fact that you've been invited onto a TV program, you'd sort of become semi-famous for the man who'd built his own nuclear bunker.
Yeah, I suppose I did really. We got. I think we must have had half a dozen TV networks down. We even had a South Korean team down. We had Channel 7 of Network Australia. We had several TV companies in the UK. I think we had one or two people who wanted to write books, contact, stuff like that. And so we had a big spread in the Sunday Times, which in those days was a pretty big paper, No, so we've sort of known, really. Yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily a celebrity or anything, but I suppose we're fairly young as well. So, sort of photographically with the young family, it sort of made good, sort of quite pictorial, And now I think it'd break the camera lens if they photographed me now, but in those days I wasn't too bad looking, I suppose.
I'm looking at the photo now of you with the beard and the 80s hair.
Oh yeah. That's right, the 80s hair. It's nice to have hair. I wish I could have cut some off and stuck it on now. But
I asked Conrad if he ever brought any friends home to see the bunker.
Weirdly, as a primary school, it wasn't a thing. It just didn't come up. At secondary school, a couple of my mates came to visit me. I went to a private school about 20 miles away, maybe a bit less, but it was like half an hour a slog to get to school. And we were in the hillbillies, so people didn't really come to visit. But I remember when I got 12, 13, you'd have people sleep over, yeah? And we had a reasonably sized farmhouse. It was all right. And they would come back to school and make two statements about us. They'd say, I was at Conrad's house over the weekend. He's got a massive house. That was one. He's a right snob. We weren't, but that was what they said. And then it was, and they've got a bomb shelter in their garden. And that was like the two things that they would say about us. And I'd get like more questions than grief, but the odd, they thought it was like an eye-rolling thing to have in your garden. But it never upset me. And I just used to say, yeah, it's really cool. If you come down, I'll let you go in there. And that thing about letting people go in there, my goodness, the amount of friends that I took down there was ridiculous. Every single one of my mates wanted to go and have a look, And once they'd seen it, they thought it was cool. As it got older, it got more of a storeroom status, less than a bomb shelter, more of a place to put stuff. So it got less cool. But the first few years when I took my friends down, when I was old enough to sort of do that, I'd unpeg it, put the peg in, get down, and they'd be like impressed that I could do it, man, and then the other way, and how to operate it. I'd go in, and I'd be like, yeah, this is where you sleep, and the mattresses were laid out, and there were still bits of tinned food still in the cupboards, that kind of thing. You could kind of imagine living there, and slowly but surely we ate all the food by bringing it back in the house, and even years later there was stuff that we were eating that was way past best before.
As a result of building the bunker, Graham starts his own bunker building business.
Tom Butler, the nuclear protection guy, when I was sort of chatting to him, I said, well, I got mine built, and he came down. He was very impressed with it, and I think he took some shots for his own, pushing his own company. But he said to me, have you thought about getting into local authorities? Because they're all allowed to build shelters now in their headquarters, and it's 100% funded. Did you know? And I didn't know. So I thought, oh, it's a good idea. But I was just on my own. I had a job, I was working. But I just thought I'd do a bit of a flyer, and I sort of drafted a letter, managed to chat up one of the secretaries in the office completely illegally, and she very kindly typed me some letters, which, of course, in those days, it was all very primitive. It was you typed a letter, you didn't word pro it or just cut and paste. It was pretty much all hydraulic, and so it was quite a lot of work. And I think I did a mail shot of, I think, some local councils, probably about 20 or 30 locally. And Harrogate District Council contacted me, which wasn't too far away from, because I was living in the same place I'm now in East Riding of Yorkshire, and said, can you come down and see what you can do for us? And I went down and met the gentleman there. I think his name was Mr. Benson. I think I seem to rings a bell. It was only a very small basement. It was quite a tricky one, really. It was an old building. But I said we can do something, and gave him some ideas. He commissioned me to do a sort of feasibility study, how we could do it. So I put it to him and costed it out. He said, right, can you get the full design done and do tenders? And then I did everything. I did the full design, tenders, prepared the specification, drawings. I did all the tendering, went out to tender to contractors, and got the winning bid. Got it approved by the council, and I supervised the work. So that was the first job, and then I got. I think that was in '85. I think that was, and then I got a job in Africa. Would you believe? So that sort of interrupted the procedure for the nuclear at the time. There wasn't a second job; it was only the one job, and I went out to Africa for a while, and then came back to start in the new year, and got pushing again with it. And we then got a massive project in Dumfries for Dumfries and Galloway Regional Council, which was emergency headquarters and information technology building. So it was a very big structure, and they commissioned us to do the whole job. So that was great, and that really got my business going, because it was big money, really, because it was big design fees, and we had a very good working relationship with the architect who worked for the local authority, and we got it all pulled together. It all worked, and then we got down to Horsham and down to East Sussex. We did some various projects down there in London. We had a lot on the books by the late 80s, and of course then the Berlin Wall came down, and that was the end of it. All the funding stopped from central government. They thought there was no longer a risk, so they weren't going to fund it 100% or any percent. So local authorities, that was it, really. There was no reason for them to spend council tax monies on that. So that was the end of that part of the business. But we diversified and survived, but it was tricky.
What's your bunker like now? Does it still exist?
Yeah, it's still there. It's a bit damp now because the dehumidifier has failed, and I'm no longer living there, so I can't maintain it like it used to do. But it's still work if it's needed. It's pretty much the same conditions it was built 40 odd years ago. Reinforced concrete doesn't really change. You can probably see that from the bunkers of the Second World War. If you go in them now, even though they're not maintained, still quite robust, a lot of them.
Did you have any trouble from CND?
No, I didn't have any trouble from CND, no. I mean, I think they're just a bit misguided, really. I think it's a nice ideal, but the problem is human beings are human beings, really. If someone's got a gun and someone hasn't, the person with the gun's likely to beat you.
If the worst had happened and you climb out to a post-nuclear attack UK, how did you think you were going to feed yourselves or heat yourselves in that scenario?
Well, I suppose you'd go foraging, you'd try to get to a nearby town and see what was available in supermarkets if they're still around, if they haven't been thieved and wrecked too much. But you'd have to start growing your own food, and you'd have to start, husbanding your own livestock. Collect up some chickens. I'm sure you'd have found some chickens kicking around, or a pig or two, and just gone back to really basic farming and just self-sustaining. You would have to do it that way. You'd have to really go back probably a couple of 300 years in lifestyle. And it would be a very, very steep learning curve, and if you didn't learn, you would starve and you wouldn't live.
And we have further information such as videos and links in our show notes, which will show as a link in your podcast app. Now, this show wouldn't exist without our generous Patreons, so I want to thank one and all of them for their support. You can very easily become a Patreon by going to coldwarconversations.com/donate. If you can't wait for the next episode, please visit our Facebook discussion group, where listeners just like you continue the Cold War conversation. Just search for Cold War Conversations in Facebook. Thank you very much for listening. It is really appreciated. Goodbye.